Welcome to episode 24 of Sunday Scaries Skill Sessions. Today I'm going to be talking about public speaking. So this is something that used to really terrify me, something that I've worked a lot on personally. And if you saw my post a couple days ago, then you know I am giving a keynote speech to my college for their alumni week. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I did personally to overcome that fear of public speaking and to just kind of break that down into ways that y'all might be able to use for your own selves if that's something that you also struggle with. So I used to, whenever I was, giving a presentation in class, I would have my tongue would go numb and would feel all tingly. I would get really red in the face. My chest would break out into hives. It felt like my heart was going to beat out of my chest. It was really bad to the point where I would just be absolutely terrified if like a professor or a teacher ever assigned a presentation that we had to give in front of the class. And so I used to wear, no matter, it could have been 90 degrees outside, I was going to wear a turtleneck giving a presentation so that no one knew that I was freaking out. And I was sort of kind of able to hide it sometimes, but on the inside, I was miserable. So I knew this was something that I really wanted to work towards. And so if you go back, I think it's episode 20, where I talk about social anxiety, and giving presentations, public speaking is sort of like a subtype of social anxiety because the fear is the same, where the thing that was freaking me out was not that I didn't know what I was talking about. It was the fear of judgment and evaluation. So if the presentation was for a grade, that would always really heighten my anxiety even higher. So it's that same fear, judgment and evaluation. And in episode 20, I talked about how you don't want to avoid those things that scare you, because your brain starts to learn that you need to be anxious in order to avoid it, and avoiding it's the only way that you survive. So the next time it's going to make you even more anxious, and it's just this really bad cycle that you can get into. So approaching things like public speaking, if it's scary for you, is incredibly important, because you want to show your brain that you can do this thing, that it's not as bad as you're telling yourself, and that you don't need the anxiety in order to survive, because you don't need to avoid it. Doing that requires exposure work. And one way to do that work is through something called an exposure hierarchy. So basically, you kind of have this goal in mind, and you're breaking that goal down into smaller steps. And so you're starting with something that doesn't feel so terrible, so uncomfortable for you, and you just kind of take it up a notch every time. So I will share my actual exposure hierarchy that I did with my therapist for this stuff. So my first one was to just create the presentation. It wasn't terrible anxiety, but it was present. So I gave it a 10. This is out of 100. 10 out of 100. So it's there. It's not unbearable, but it's there. And then imagining giving the presentation. Now that used to start to really get me feeling nervous, where if I just imagined myself getting up in front of the class, that would put me at about a 30. Okay, and then giving the presentation alone. So if I'm just practicing it in my room completely by myself, that still made my anxiety a little higher at about a 40. Then if I was practicing the presentation with someone who I'm more comfortable with or that I trust, that put me at about a 50. And then if I were to practice giving the presentation, let's say it was like a group assignment, and I had a partner, and I was friends with them, probably more acquaintances, but not someone I was super comfortable with, then that was about a 70. And then finally giving the presentation in front of the class, that would put me at about a 90. So pretty high, not a fun experience to be at a 90. So I knew this was something that I really needed to work on, because it was really hindering me. And a part of me has always admired or enjoyed it. I guess that sounds weird when you're at a 90, but a part of me appreciated public speaking and wanted to be good at it. And so this is something that I took really seriously and spent a lot of time on. Now, to give you a clear expectation of this, or realistic expectation of this, it's really slow. It's tedious, slow work. This does not happen overnight. But in my opinion, totally worth it. The other expectation to have with this is when you have a fear like this. So this used to put me at a 90. That's really high. And so your expectation should not be to never feel any anxiety when you're public speaking. It's not to get rid of the anxiety. That's not the goal. It's normal to feel nervous about something that's important to you. So the goal is not to get rid of the anxiety completely. The goal is to get the anxiety to a manageable place. Okay, so you could kind of create your own number there, but I would say that would be for me probably about a 20, where I'm still feeling like butterflies and a little nervous, but I can still think clearly. I can calm myself down, remember what I have to say, all those things. So since my first one, just creating the presentation, put me at about a 10, I didn't really need to work with that one. So for me, I started with just imagining giving the presentation. So what you do is you get yourself there, you get yourself to for me, it was a 30 on the scale. So the anxiety's there. Some of the physical sensations might start to come with that. For me, my heart used to start beating pretty fast, relatively quickly, even if I just started thinking about giving the presentation. So what you do is you think about that, you get the anxiety to come up, and then you do some kind of technique to get the anxiety down to that manageable level. So like I said, for me, a 20. So I would put ice on the back of my neck, and I would do breathing techniques until that anxiety got to a 20. And you keep doing that until this level of the hierarchy is no longer at that 30. So that even that first one step can kind of take some time, take some work. So, you know, you may spend a few weeks, a few days practicing that before now thinking about giving a presentation. I'm probably at a 0 for that, honestly. But back then my goal was to just get to a 20, where thinking about giving the presentation was no longer at a 30, it was at a 20. But you have to practice getting yourself to the 30 and soothing yourself down to the 20. You have to do that multiple times until now thinking about it doesn't get you at that 30 anymore. So once you get to that place where this is no longer a 30, it's at a manageable place, then you go to the next step. You do not move on from a step until it no longer induces the same amount of anxiety and the anxiety is in a manageable place. So, you know, for some people that can take quite a while once you start getting into the higher level anxiety. So like giving a presentation in front of like a classmate, that took a long time and a lot of practice to feel like that was no longer at a 70 and that it was at more of like a 20. That's something that you can do with your therapist, where you can actually practice giving a presentation to your therapist to help expose yourself to doing that thing. So nowadays, when I think about giving a presentation, I still get a little bit nervous, and that's totally normal and fine. It's like I said earlier, normal to feel nervous about stuff like that. But it's nowhere near a 90. It's something that I can actually say yes to if someone invites me to speak. I don't dread it. I get excited. And so it's really freeing to be able to do this kind of work, because it's unfortunate when anxiety starts closing doors of opportunity for you. The other thing I wanted to say, so I'm going to show y'all, when I was telling you earlier that one of the symptoms of my anxiety or panic attacks with public speaking was the flushing and the rash redness on my chest. So I have rosacea, and so I flush very easily. And so for me, one of the things that I used to work through that exposure hierarchy, I needed medication to help with the flushing, because even though I was working on the anxiety, what would happen is if I just felt that first little twinge of anxiety, I was getting good at soothing it. But the problem was that all it takes is one quick second of feeling anxious for the flushing to happen. And then once it's there, it doesn't go away. So even though I was feeling better, my face was still all red and I still had like the rash on my chest, and you can feel that when it's happening. And so knowing that I was red would then make me anxious again. So I needed medication for that. That was part of my process. So I say that to let y'all know that it's totally normal and fine to need medication to help work you through the exposure hierarchy. For me, my goal was to get to a place where I didn't always need medication. But to be totally honest, for the keynote address, just because it's a little bigger than what I'm used to doing, I'll probably still take some medication. So I'll show you the one that I take. It's clonidine. For a lot of people who flush, they take propranolol, which is a beta blocker. So basically it like reduces your blood pressure. That one did not do that much for me. And so I did clonidine instead. I experimented with that, and it works wonders for me. So I'm obviously not a medical doctor, so don't just rush out and go take someone else's medicine, please. But if you also experience flushing or anything like that, talk to your doctor, because there are medications that you can take that can help with that side effect and can make public speaking a little more manageable. So for me, I used that medication while I was working through my exposure hierarchy until I got to the point where I started feeling more comfortable with public speaking and I wasn't having those twinges of anxiety that brought on the flushing in the first place. So now I don't really need it so much, but absolutely no shame if you do. Whatever helps is great. So that is my personal journey with public speaking and overcoming my fear and anxiety around that stage fright. And so hopefully that's helpful for y'all to hear. And if you are interested, try making your own exposure hierarchy. And if you have a therapist, work with that person on like exposing yourself to those things so that you can hopefully get to a point where now the thing that's scaring you the most is no big deal.